Norberline would like to welcome you to Be Your Own Therapist with Alan Marsh. Thank you, Alan.
Thanks, Sheila. Here I am in Sydney. I'm just one of the students at Vajrayana Institute, one of the older students in all senses. And what I do at VI is just basically drop-in meditation once a week, and then I do Discovering Buddhism as well. That's once a week. So, so last week we actually used the topic of rejoicing, and this week sort of similar topic. It's called self-compassion or self-kindness, and so that's what we'll get to. But as I usually start with just 5 minutes breathing meditation, mindfulness practice, where we actually just spend some time setting our motivation and calming the mind, and then feel that after that there's some sort of peace, calmness that we can use to study the Dharma and do some maybe discussion practice and so on. Okay, so let's begin with mindfulness practice. And what we're doing is just looking at the breath. Breath is the object. We just do about 5 minutes. Main thing is to have a straight back. Can be lying down as long as the back is straight. And what we're doing is just allowing ourselves to focus on the breath without changing it. And that's the concentration part of it. And then part of the mind is also doing what we call introspection. It's kind of like checking what we're doing. It's like monitoring or just checking on where we are mentally. And so that helps us to spot or realize when we've lost the breath, we've gone off into a distracting thought or distracting sound or whatever. So there's two. What we're doing two things. One is the main practice is focusing on the breath, and then we're also just being aware of what we're doing, being aware of being aware. Okay, so let's just begin. Okay, so we now begin by just bringing our attention inwards. Feel that we're just letting go of the outside world, whatever we've been doing before this. Just taking stock, particularly checking our body. Part of it is also just beginning with a sense of appreciation of how lucky we are to be able to come together like this, do some practice together, study the Dharma, study the incredible teachings of the Buddha, and also take care of our minds. Our motivation is not just purely for our own benefit, but also by calming, having a calm mind, practicing the Dharma, we can bring benefit to others, those around us, and all sentient beings, all living beings. Now we just start with the body and just fill our body with our awareness, checking for any tension, any tightness, feeling the weight of the body on the chair, the cushion. Upper part of the body, the shoulders are relaxed. Eyes can be open or closed or just half open. We can use the out breath to breathe out any tension we find in the body. Consciously letting go, relaxing. Feel the gentle pull of gravity into the earth and allowing ourselves to surrender to that, allowing ourselves to be held by the earth. Gradually giving more attention to the breathing, the gentle rhythm of the breath in the body. Nothing to change, nothing to judge, but just observing what's happening. Noticing where our attention naturally focuses on the breath. It could be at the nostrils, it could be at the abdomen, lower down, or just the whole body moving with each breath. And just resting our mind there on the breath. Also on the alert, the watch for distracting thoughts. Always will be thoughts coming and going. If we find we've been distracted and drawn away from the breath with a thought, just notice that and gently let go of that distracting thought and patiently come back to the breath. Staying with the breath, the full flow of the in-breath, full flow of the out-breath. Okay, just relax. So, this topic, about self-compassion, being kind to ourselves, fairly unusual in terms of traditional Buddhist teachings. I think it's the two sources I'm using is Thupten Jinpa's book. I mentioned this book last week, A Fearless Heart. That's what it looks like. Looks back to front to me, but Fearless Heart by Thupten Jinpa, who's very well-respected teacher of Buddhism and meditation, particularly to Westerners, based in America. He used to be the translator for His Holiness the Dalai Lama when he was a monk, and then he disrobed and became a lay teacher. And he's at one of the universities in America, not sure which one, Stanford. He's doing compassion cultivation training. That's kind of his specialty. And he's very well acquainted with both the traditional Buddhist teachings and also the Western mind and Western psychology. So putting those two together, he's found that this particular meditation is good, particularly good for the Western mind. And the other book is His Holiness the Dalai Lama's wonderful book called In Praise of Great Compassion. That's a series of books called The Library of Wisdom and Compassion. There's up to about 6 or 7 books now, which he's Thupten Chodron, the nun, is the editor, and she's putting all the Dalai Lama's teachings that are given specifically for Westerners. It's like a Western view of the Lam Rim. And so that particular book is looking at great compassion, and also His Holiness spent some time on the topic of looking after our own self, our sense of kindness to ourselves. So apparently in Tibetan, traditional Tibetan society, Thupten Jinpa grew up in a typical Tibetan Buddhist family, and he said that they didn't need to sort of spend time focusing on their own self-kindness. He said, I'll just quote what he says. He says, traditional Buddhist compassion meditation, for example, operate from the premise that we have the instinct to be kind to ourselves, and the techniques involve extending this natural feeling towards others. We start with this instinctive sense of care for ourselves, and then we expand to friends, relatives, strangers, and even difficult people, enemies. So from the loved ones, we can actually expand that natural sense of looking after ourselves. So traditionally we understand self-compassion as the basis from which we learn to become compassionate and caring towards others. So so this is the assumption, and when he gives the example when he was, I think, translating for His Holiness back in 1989 it was a conference with psychotherapists, apparently at Newport Beach in America. The Dalai Lama was discussing Buddhism in context of Western psychology, and one of the psychiatrists or psychologists mentioned the idea of self-hatred, and this idea that many of their patients suffered from this idea of low self-esteem and self-loathing, is what he called it. The Dalai Lama was first completely baffled, and he initially said he questioned the very coherence of the concept. And he said, if self-preservation, self-care are fundamental instincts of every creature, as Buddhist psychology assumes, how can we hate every being, our very being? So it was something that he not encountered until he came into Western psychology. And so from there, he acknowledged that this tendency exists. And he said self-hatred seems to suggest to the Dalai Lama something much more problematic at the core of self-realization. The panelists had to work quite hard to convince His Holiness not only is the concept coherent, it's a psychological reality, not uncommon in the West. So now, that's back in 1989, over the years, Dalai Lama now understands this self-hatred is rooted in this very, he says, having looked into it, it's still part of our self-caring instinct, but self-hatred, he says, comes from caring a lot, but not being able to accept or forgive our imperfect selves. We're wanting to be too perfect. With self-compassion training, we learn to reconnect with that part of us that still cares purely and tenderly. But we also learn this other aspect of forgiving our faults and not judging ourselves and holding on to a kind of a guilt if we don't measure up to our own standards. So few quotes from His Holiness. He says, like self-respect, loving ourselves in a realistic and practical way is important. Self-love involves caring for ourselves with acceptance and kindness, free from unrealistic expectations. And this compares with self-indulgence, where we're focusing on worldly wishes, self-centeredness, believing our happiness is more important than others. So genuine self-love, he says, enables us to love others and live harmoniously with others. And part of that is, on the Dharma path, working ourselves, working on the path to be free of cyclic existence, attain full enlightenment, and so bringing that joy to others as well. So this process, he says, involves certain steps. I mean, it's quite. If we, many people don't have this tendency. Some have a natural self-confidence, feeling that they've got a strong sense of self-worth, which isn't just based on some inflated sort of pride, thinking that they're better than others, based on their sort of worldly achievements, better house, better education, and so on. But that, if we don't, the part of the meditation we're going to do is just to check to see how we judge ourselves when we make mistakes. And there's actually even a series of questions I'll just refer to in a minute that we can ask ourselves to see whether we sort of have this tendency to dwell on our faults and beat ourselves up and over-judge ourselves. It's developing a feeling of guilt when we do something wrong rather than just regret. So this distinction of guilt and regret seems to be quite important, whereas the regret is just regretting our faults and wanting to do better and learning from them. And guilt is this tendency to identify with the fault and obsess over it, and so see that this is part of our being that we're stuck with and never be any good. I tend to, this feeling that I'm not worth it. So this idea of holding on to quite a negative image of ourselves. So some of the things that can help, this is, I think I'm quoting from His Holiness. He says, reflecting on our Buddha nature, part of this, the Buddhist teaching is that our innate, we have the potential to become Buddha. The mind itself by nature is unstained by all the defilements, all the delusions and karma. It's like this, they often give the example of the sky, the clouds being our delusions and negativities, and the sky unstained by that, and the clouds being impermanent, not based on anything, not based on wisdom, but based on wrong ways of thinking. They can be eliminated, and behind it is this Buddha nature. So that's one thing to remind ourselves of. Also avoiding identifying with that fault, just seeing it as impermanent. And particularly now that we've come in contact with the Dharma, we have so many techniques to deal with things like anger, attachment, and ignorance. So we've got practices, purification practices, and we've got techniques to actually deal with these negativities. So it's no need to think that they're there forever and they're part of us. So the other thing is to be, they call this the idea of common humanity, that reminding ourselves that just like others, we make mistakes. So if we do something wrong, rather than just dwelling on how bad we are, we're not enlightened beings, just like everybody else. We're going to make mistakes, and that feeling, sense of, can give us a sense of commonality with others, sense of common humanity. So, this the idea of self-esteem, which I guess we know quite well about in Western psychology, Thupten Jinpa says it's similar. It can be the result of practicing self-kindness, but sometimes he says in the West, self-esteem is based on building up our sense of being better than others. You know, being the best in sport or the best in our field of work, wanting to be competitive. He says that's not the kind of self-esteem that we're looking for in self-kindness. We're looking at the sense of based on our what I've just said, Buddha nature, that our faults can be dealt with, and that, like others, we have faults. So, so there's this idea of self-esteem can be a result of the practice based on this kind of reasoning. I'll just read a little. Thupten Jinpa works very closely with, he's got clinical groups that he works with for years and years using the Buddhist meditations, and then he tests how they're going, which practices seem to be the most effective for the Western mind. And he's working with another psychologist. I've never heard of him. Her actually, Kristin Neff, apparently quite famous for combining Buddhist practices with Western psychology. So this psychologist says three components of self-compassion. One is self-kindness, and my notes I scribbled out. Self-kindness, which is towards our shortcomings. Okay, it's just kind of, well, I make mistakes and I will make mistakes until I become enlightened. But that's because I'm not enlightened. I'm working on that, practicing Buddhism. I've got the Dharma. Self-kindness, common humanity, which I've just mentioned, and mindfulness. So mindfulness, she says, is being aware of our faults and not obsessing over them. So that you probably might do it in your drop-in meditation, where you look at thoughts as they come up. So the mind itself, the activities of mind, is one of the objects that we can focus on in mindfulness meditation. So by seeing the thoughts that arise, maybe there could be angry thoughts. We welcome all the thoughts when we're doing this practice. Could be thoughts about attachment, So by just recognizing these thoughts that come up without getting involved with them, but just seeing, oh, well, there's some anger coming up there, there's attachment, there's perhaps thinking about either food or something that's distracting us. So that gives us some practice at giving some distance between what is that is causing the attraction or the attachment or the anger, the impatience, and then the mind itself, giving that sense of distance. So practicing mindfulness, she says, is very useful to get us, make us able to see if we have this tendency to self-judge and self-obsess and hook on and hold on to our shortcomings. So this is probably quite an interesting little self-assessment questionnaire she comes up with. He says, true or false? There's, I think, 5 questions. I try to understand and be patient towards those aspects of my personality that I don't like. True or false? So that's self-kindness. Okay, so that's a yes, then you're practicing self-kindness, being patient to your things you don't like about yourself. When I'm going through a very hard time, I give myself the caring and tenderness I need. That's also self-kindness, she said. When I feel inadequate in some way, I try to remind myself that feelings of inadequacy are shared by most people. Common humanity, feeling the equanimity with others. When things are going badly for me, I see the difficulties as part of life that everyone goes through, common humanity. And the last one, when I'm feeling down, I try to approach my feelings with curiosity and openness, mindfulness. Oh, and then one more. When I fail at something important to me, I try to keep things in perspective, mindfulness. So seeing things by position of mindfulness. So that's sort of a kind of a bit of an introduction to the meditation that we'll do, but I just thought maybe any questions or reactions or comments so far from people. What an interesting practice. Maybe
I actually read that part of the book maybe a few weeks ago, the 5 items you just mentioned. Cool. And it was curious to me that I didn't know how to answer it. Like I obviously don't think about it. I wasn't thinking about it at the time. So that was an insight for me.
Right. So that's I guess involves we need to sort of put it in the form of a meditation where we have time to just see whether in the meditation we're going to do, we think of something that we've done that we later regret doing. And then we try and recall what our feeling, how we reacted, whether we judged ourselves harshly, whether we could move on from it. So I guess we need to probably be on the cushion and do some quiet contemplation to see what's happening in the mind when we do these things that we regret later. That's something I guess you can't do really quickly. It takes several. Well, Trungpa Rinpoche said he's been working with some of these groups for 2 or 3 years. It can take probably 6, 12 months or more to see any change in the students' mind and how they feel about themselves and so on. Yeah. Okay, so anything else come up? Just, I guess, I mean, if you think about the traditional teachings, Lam Tsongkhapa and so on, it's not something that I've ever heard. I've never heard Lama Yeshe can talk about this. He talked about this because I'm old enough to remember to have attended Lama Yeshe's teachings when he came to Australia. So he used to actually, I think, and Lama Zopa does mention it sometimes, but he used to sort of often tell us that we have our biggest obstacles ourselves, our limited view of ourselves, thinking that we're inadequate and so on. So he had this wonderful ability to just see that you could just in his presence, you could see he was seeing only the goodness in people there. And so it was very uplifting to just even to listen or be in Lama Yeshe's presence. Yeah. So that's, so it is, I think, as Thupten just said, probably it's far more common in, he said, not just Western societies, but tends to be even in Eastern societies or non-Western societies where there's kind of a capitalist culture where people have to compete and have to be the best, encouraged to, excel. There's a lot of individualism rather than communal, traditional society kind of awareness. I was lucky enough to spend quite a few years of my working life in the Pacific Islands, Fiji, Vanuatu, Papua New Guinea, and just to see the care of those people have a natural instinct to put the group ahead of the individual. So much more important to have everybody in the group being cared for, particularly to old people. All old people are included in younger families, they don't have old people's homes or anything like that. And so there's a lot of things we can learn from how those traditional societies have this wonderful sense of commonality with others, how taking care of each other. If there's anyone going through, say, grief or any kind of problems, it's always there's people around. So there's things to learn. The other thing I realized that it's much harder to be a Buddhist, or if you want to break out and I'd say something quite individual like an artist, or most of those societies are based on very strong Christian practices and religion. So the downside is that if you try and become a Buddhist or something like that, you need to leave the group, and so it's quite difficult. Anyway, always pluses and minuses. So in this particular meditation, which is a combination of a couple that Thupten Jinpa does or suggests in his book, we do two things. That we cultivate self-forgiveness as the first step, bringing to mind something we've done. May not be something that affected other people. Could be like being angry and retaliating if somebody hurts us, perhaps in a conversation or some other way. But it also includes things where we just don't affect anybody else, but we might, say, overindulge, spend too much on ourselves, do something that maybe leave a job in anger or something, and then we later regret it. Could be leaving a relationship and then realizing that we're wrong, it was our fault, whatever. So something that could affect other people or may not affect other people. And then we just look at the reaction. The next step is that we try and, instead of taking the idea of the prosecutor, this is a bad thing to do, I was wrong, we take the idea of a defense. So actually, although it was wrong, I can understand because such and such, I was feeling belittled, I didn't get a chance to speak, or there was some reason, although it's not correct behaviour, but I understand why I did it. And I'm human because I will make mistakes. So it's kind of looking at things from a caring, forgiving as way of this particular mistake, or it could be just a general tendency we have. So then we look at how we reacted, whether it's thinking, I'm a terrible person for doing that, whether we have this sort of condemning overreaction, or maybe we don't, but if we do, we can just look at that and see that really is an exaggeration, that I'm identifying with the fault, saying that's me, as if it's part of my being, instead of seeing, sorry, I've still got a bit of a cold, instead of seeing that, as Buddhist teachings tell us, all these things like impatience, anger, attachment, grasping, miserliness, so on, they're based on delusions of karma. They're wrong ways of thinking that this self is some sort of inherent existing person that is more important than others. So it's all based on delusion and wrong ways of thinking. Behind that is the unstained Buddha nature. So we can sort of realize that actually there's no need to identify with this. We can deal with it, and then we can purify our minds, put the Buddhist teachings into practice. So there's various things we can do. And then we actually use our out breath. We start doing some breath meditation, visualizing that we're breathing out any kind of guilt, self-condemnation, self-hatred, self-loathing. And we spend some time just visualizing, breathing that out, letting it go, and freeing ourselves. Second part of the practice is called it's generating compassion, self-forgiveness, and using a compassion image. So we visualize various things we can use. We can use a stupa, which is said to be a very powerful image of Buddha's body, speech, and mind. We can use our guru, if we have a guru, a teacher. Then we can use the Buddha himself, or we can just use white light, healing white light that embodies all compassion, embodies a being or energy that accepts us exactly as we are with all our faults. Compassion image. We bring that to mind and we actually generate the feeling of light, compassion coming towards us, acceptance, trust, and feeling that warmth with each in-breath. We use the in-breath then to take in that sense of forgiveness and acceptance from the compassion image. So we're using some of combination of analytical meditation and mindfulness meditation. Excuse me. So then we just feel the effect of that forgiveness and compassion coming into our mind. The last part of the practice, is feeling that we have this sense of being whole, forgiven, and we feel that we are actually a source of compassion ourselves. And so we can visualize all beings in human form around us who, like us, suffering, only want happiness, don't want suffering, just like us. And we radiate our sense of wholeness and compassion to those beings. So that's the plan. And so if you've got access to the book, you'll find, I think there's two, I can't give you the page numbers, but there's a combination of actually two of Thupten Jinka's meditations. Yeah. Self-forgiveness, and then using compassion image. Okay, so time's moving.
Will you hold up the book again?
The name of the book, it's called A Fearless Heart. Fearless Heart, and the author is Thupten Jinpa. Thupten Jinpa, Jinpa. And I think you can get it on Kindle as well as hard copy. Okay, so let's just briefly do the practice. I always speak too much, so we'll just come into our meditation for a few seconds, and then I'll lead you through the practice. Just a few moments to come back to the breath, get our body comfortable. Okay, so we begin our practice of self-kindness, self-forgiveness, by bringing to mind a time when we did something that we later regretted. So it could be words, actions, maybe even thoughts. Could have we reacted to some harsh words somebody said to us, retaliating? Perhaps we hurt somebody by our actions and then realize that we've done the wrong thing. Perhaps we just did something that didn't affect others, that we later regretted. Action that affected our lives. But we had a self-reproaching attitude. Now, without getting caught in the details, see if we can recall the attitude or the reaction we had to that mistake we made, whether we tended to dwell on it, identify with that mistake, feel guilty about it, ruminate over it, judging ourselves, I'm a bad person. So if we have that tendency, we notice that it can happen. We can ask ourselves, is this a habit, something that we tend to do quite often when we make mistakes? Judge ourselves well. Have a strong sense of dislike for ourselves for making that mistake. Now, next step is, if we do have this tendency or we have overjudged ourselves, seeing it from a different angle, finding some human reasons for what we did. We're not enlightened. We will make mistakes. Perhaps we felt belittled at the time. We didn't get a chance to be heard. We're not saying what we did is right, but we can understand why we felt we did that. I'm not a perfect enlightened being, so I will make mistakes. Like others, I'm human. See if we can look at the situation with regret, but without guilt, without self-reproach or condemnation, or identifying with that mistake, that fault. I can learn from this. I can admit that I have a tendency to dislike being criticized or whatever the fault is. So we blame the delusions, but not ourselves. It's our delusions that we need to focus on and work on. Behind it is this Buddha's potential. Even the Buddha was unenlightened and became enlightened by practicing the Dharma. We too can do that. Recognize our faults, work with them. Now we use the out breath to breathe out this sense of reproach that we might have. Breathing out all the guilt, that identification that we're a bad person, that we're wrong, will never be any good. We can let that go. Using the out breath, thinking, I'm letting go. I can let go of this. I forgive myself. I can let go. Any guilt, self-reproach is not helpful. I'm letting go. And that negative thought goes right out beyond space where it can do no harm. Breathing it out. Now we can do the second part of the practice, bringing to mind, visualizing in front of us a compassionate image, an image that embodies for us all unconditional love and acceptance. Could be a stupa, could be our guru, could be the Buddha himself, could be a friend who totally trusts and accepts us as we are, which is white light, embodying acceptance, trust, love and kindness. And with each in-breath, we imagine that we're taking in that acceptance and compassion from the compassion image into our hearts, the warm white light, acceptance, filling our body, filling our mind. That white light of acceptance and compassion soothes the mind, eliminates all anxiety, guilt, reproach, and judgmental thinking of our mind. And that full acceptance from the compassion image, the white light. We feel a sense of ease and serenity on this white light that pervades our body and mind. That feeling of blissful stillness and acceptance and love, we become compassion, a source of compassion ourselves, compassion and loving kindness. And now we can visualize all sentient beings in human form around us, sharing that sense of acceptance and compassion, loving kindness with all beings. Breathing out compassion and wisdom to all those beings. Thinking, may you, all sentient beings like myself, have happiness. May you be happy, may you be healthy, may you live in peace. May you all sentient beings like myself be happy, be healthy, and live in peace. So finally, we can just dedicate any positive merit we've accumulated, positive imprints on our mind from this practice towards our progress on the path to enlightenment, developing compassion and wisdom, becoming a fully enlightened being. And I'll just read Lama Zopa's special dedication for the pandemic. However many sick sentient beings there are, may they quickly be freed of all sickness. May all sickness, without exception, of transmigrating beings never occur again. May all sickness, wars, famine, torture, poverty, economic problems in the world, and dangers of earth, water, fire, and wind be pacified immediately. May perfect peace and happiness prevail in everyone's hearts and lives. May Buddha Dharma last for a long time, and may sentient beings in the world meet the Buddha Dharma and achieve enlightenment as quickly as possible, dedicating to that. Okay, so that's the practice. There's still a few minutes if anybody has any questions. Sorry, I didn't leave very much time. So hopefully you have some success with that practice. So great, thanks so much for being there. It's wonderful to see you. Have a wonderful day and a good week. And I hope to see you next week, same time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Alan.